I should have told people to do live
Is
stream.
this being streamed?
It'll be
Yes.
streamed and it'll be saved.
Great.
People can...
Oh, well, look at that.
Yeah, I already had like 5 people ask me if they can get a recording.
Yeah.
Because everyone's doing so
Yeah.
so.
Well, thank you all for joining. Really nice to have everyone here. We just wanted to say briefly at the start, Zibby has a fundraiser going for schools in the Palisades right now. If you haven't not heard about it, we're accepting monetary donations via our website. So just go to zibbymedia.com. Anything is appreciated. So we're really excited to be talking about restoring our girls this morning. I have short bios that I'll read. And then I'll let you guys take it away. We do about a half an hour of conversation, about 15 minutes for Q&A, about 15 minutes of signing, but it's slow this morning. We're not going to kick anyone out. So Cathy Cassani Adams co-hosts the long-running Zen Parenting Radio podcast and founded the Zen Parenting Conference in Chicago. She's the author of Zen Parenting and Living What You Want Your Kids to Learn and Restoring Our Girls, of course. Cathy's a clinical social worker, certified parent coach, former elementary school educator, and yoga teacher. She's a blogger for the Huffington Post and a former columnist for Chicago Parent Magazine. She previously worked as a child and family therapist and clinical educator at Lurie Children's Hospital of Chicago, and now teaches in the sociology and criminology department at Dominican University. So I feel like we should all listen to what she says. Todd Adams co-founded Men Living, an international not-for-profit men's organization, and serves as its executive director. He's a certified life and leadership coach throughout the Conscious Leadership Group and a member of the Mankind Project. For the past 14 years, he has co-hosted Zen Parenting Radio, a top 10 parenting podcast on iTunes, alongside his wife, Cathy. Today, they are raising 3 daughters outside of Chicago. We're so happy to have you here today.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for being here. As she said, my name's Cathy. It's very nice to meet you. I'm very excited to be in this bookshop. I live in Chicago, but I know about this bookshop. I've heard about it. I follow it. I see the books that are reviewed. I see everything. So thank you for having me. And I wanted to ask really quickly, could you tell me what the Archer School is? Yeah, can you tell me a little more about it?
It's a 6th through 12th grade independent girls school.
Yep.
We apply Archer School for girls.
Yes.
It's up the street in Brentwood, about maybe a mile or so from here.
Yeah, Sunset.
Sunset.
You should go by there.
I looked it up. I read about it a little bit, but I wanted to make sure. I know.
It's set back this lawn, and in May they put a maypole up.
Yeah, it's about 30 years old. It used to be Eastern Star Home for Women, so it's always been a space for
women, girls, yeah.
And that's where the Masonic Lodge or whatever, which I don't understand, but they turned it into girls' school. Yeah,
That's
and
wonderful.
Our Circle of Moms is just like a cross school parent kind of support group that organizes a lot of parent ed and social events to uplift each other and our girls.
Great. So most of you I'm assuming, have daughters.
Yes.
And then do some of you have sons as well? Okay, great. So,
And not all go to Archer.
right. Not everybody is from Archer, which is, it's just really curious about the connection. I will take you up on that. I do want to see it. So Todd and I have been hosting the Zen Parenting Radio podcast for I think we're coming up on our 15th year. The reason why radio is in the title is because people didn't know what podcasts were, when we started. So we thought we were really going to be a radio show. But we have been talking about self-awareness when it comes to parenting, mindfulness, compassion, connection, for as long as I can remember. As she was saying in my bio, I've been a therapist for about 20 years. So that's kind of always been my focus. But what's really kind of happened in the last 5 years for Todd and I is, he runs a men's organization, an international men's organization, and works with a lot of people. Right now they're doing something called a bridge program where they're trying to get older men to mentor younger men. And I have a very good friend named Dr. John Duffy, who wrote a book called Rescuing Our Sons. And he and I do a lot of work together. I talk about restoring our girls, which has always been my focus. I've been a therapist for women, again, as long as I can remember, and I've worked with teenage girls. I now have a 21-year-old, a 20-year-old, and a 17-year-old. So I'm right in it, when I wrote this book, it was really based on girls who were between 12 and 25. So that Gen Z, But the conversations that Todd and I tend to have are around gender. And this is really what's coming up now as far as where support is necessary. There's a lot of people who believe it's very binary. You know, you're either focusing on girls, you're focusing on boys. And we kind of meet in the middle and recognize the need for both simultaneously all the time. So this is Todd, and he is my husband and partner and podcast host. And I was so excited that he gets to be the one to kind of run this discussion, because we do this all the time. We have these talks all the time. It's kind of broken out where we can have a Q&A, after we're done having this discussion, but we kind of like it that if something comes up in the moment, just ask. It's a small group. There's no need for formalities. We don't mind getting interrupted. Okay. So Todd.
Hi, everybody.
You, buddy.
So glad you all are here. I have 2 pages of questions. I don't think I'll get through more than 5% of it, because we kind of have this chemistry where we just kind of riff. And as Cathy said, let's make this interactive. I mean, if you guys want to just sit there and listen to us riff, that's fine. But you can do that on an 800 podcast that we've already recorded. So if there's a question you have, just ask. And at the same time, I at least want to get through the basics of the book. So depending on how active you all are, we may not be able to get to everybody, but just don't be shy, and let's enjoy each other's company here.
We love questions. That's more fun, because I would much rather speak to what you're here for than just me give you some synopsis that, you can read the book, so please feel free.
With that in mind, I'm going to assume most of you have probably not read the book from start to finish. So I am going to kind of frame out at some point, how the book is laid out and the most important pieces that Cathy and I want to go over. But before even the table of contents, Cathy has a quote. And I think it's a good way to kind of, because she's a quote freak. She loves quotes. They're all over the house. They're all over her meditation area. But she chose this one as the basis of this book. And it says, what's the greatest lesson a woman should learn? That since day one, she's already had everything she needs within herself. It's the world that convinced her she did not. And it's by a woman named Ruby Kiter. Out of the thousands of quotes that you have, why did you choose that one?
Because it's the truth. I think that I don't just think, I know from my own personal experience, the therapeutic work I've done with girls, and from raising my own daughters, that we get talked out of our own best interests. We get conditioned out of the things that come naturally. Our intuitive sense of self gets hammered down with expectations of the culture. And it's not, this book is not about a railing against the culture per se. It's about how to pay attention to that and recognize that and acknowledge that, and have a conversation about these things. Because what I know is that what girls are experiencing, and women, but again, when I'm speaking about these things, I'm talking about girls and women, but the book is about how to talk to our girls about these things. That's kind of, so some people who have read the book, they're like, oh, this is kind of a self-awareness book for me as a mom too. And that's correct. I wrote it with that in mind, that the only way to talk to our girls about these difficult things is if we've acknowledged them in our own experience and in ourselves and in the culture. And I know that girls live a very, very, very paradoxical existence. They are being told that they need to be very bold and be out there and speak out, and they're simultaneously told to be quiet. They are told to look good and to look hot and to be sexy, and they're also told to quit buying so much makeup and worrying about how they look. There's a constant push and pull of what is being expected of girls. Those are just really the surfacey things, the things we see, and then the things about, eating. One of the things that really blew up during COVID and continues to be, it's the data has changed a little bit. It's not quite as intense, but eating disorders exploded during COVID, and, on top of anxiety and depression and all these other things specifically for girls. And a lot of it was combustion, all these things happening at once, being stuck in your room, not being able to go anywhere, having social media, not having any reflection of other people, losing control, because a lot of eating disorders, it's really around anxiety and managing anxiety. That's what it stems from. So, again, going back to what you said about the quote, I really believe what we need to focus on when we're talking to our girls is getting them back to trusting themselves, and also trusting what they're experiencing in the culture. Because the other thing that girls and women hear a lot is, you're making a big deal out of nothing. I don't believe you. You're too emotional. Calm down. all these things that are about you can't be trusted. And so what unfortunately happens over the course of time is girls not only internalize that for themselves, but they internalize it for other girls and women. They internalize it as a sense of being, a cultural norm. And we're seeing a lot of shifting of that right now in our political culture of like, this is where women should be, this is where men and boys should be. And so this conversation, if our girls can understand it, yes, all these things are true in that they're happening in the culture and that we are seeing them and they're experiencing these things, but they're not inherently true. Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
I have a question. Since you encouraged.
Yes, please.
Okay. I love that quote.
Yes.
I have a similar quote on my fridge, and I have 3 daughters, and my speech, one of my daughter's bat mitzvahs, I said something really similar. I'm wondering if you can speak to this. I'm finding, and I think I find this to be a truth, is that the more I feel like the more we honor ourselves and are in tune with ourselves and what our needs are, and still compassionate, but authentic with ourselves, I think there is a price. It feels like there's a price to pay on the other side.
Yeah.
And the price is that, right? Like if I'm going to speak my truth to you, you may not like what my truth is. You may not like my needs. You may not there is a change in relationships and how liked we are.
Yes.
And that's hard. And I'm just wondering if you can speak to that.
That's like the best way to describe why I wrote this book. What you just said, it's that paradox, is that this whole push, understandably, human beings, regardless of gender, to be your genuine, authentic self. And at the same time, the reality of what the culture feels about that. What it feels like, in a school system, what it feels like when you're dating, what it feels like when you're trying to, an internship, a job. And there's a lot of just saying that as bluntly and blatantly, that's what our girls need to hear, is instead of just go out there and be your genuine self and then everything will work out. And they're kind of like, well, it's kind of bullshit because I'm getting a lot of pushback about it. Or, one of my favorite things is, and this may not be, what's going on in California, but in Chicago, there's a lot of just be natural. Why do you need so much makeup? Why do you need to go to Sephora? Why do you need all this? And then girls will be like, okay, I'm going to do the natural thing. Well, guess what? People don't find them attractive. There's a lot of pushback about well, I didn't say go fully natural. I said, so, and again, those are just the surfacey things, but it's that's exactly what the issue is. And this book is less about solving these cultural problems that really shouldn't rest on us or our girls specifically, and more about how to continue this conversation so they understand the nuance of when and where. And a big part of it is personal safety. This is something that Todd and I this gender conversation, this has changed a lot, but over the last 10 years, we've had a lot of conversations about his understanding of my safety. Meaning there was a time when the girls were young and I would walk all around the house and lock all the doors and be very careful about that. And he'd be in bed already, right? And he'd be like, it's fine. Everything's going to be fine. I'm like, no, you don't understand. We lock doors. That's when I get in the car and I'm in Chicago, I lock the door. There's a safety thing where something he had never had to think about. When I walk into a parking garage, I have keys. When I park under a light. When I am walking at night, I'm very thoughtful about where I'm walking. And these are not even apparent anxieties. They're just something that I've done my whole life. It's just, we have to. And it feels between us now like an old story because you've kind of, understood this for a long time. But initially you were kind of
well, I just needed to see it through another person's lens. And as a white straight man, I'm not used to having to do that. So it took being married to her and having 3 daughters to start looking at the world through a different lens. And I got a long way to go, but I'm getting better at it.
Yeah. And then also, you're right about just the whole genuineness and then going out and having a pushback on that. And a lot of times that's from each other as women and girls too. So this is not just, patriarchy and men who are, there's a lot of internalized, well, I can't do that, so you can't do that. Right. And which is a big part of why there's the self-awareness component in this book, around us as moms, because we have to really parse through that to have the discussions, or then there's sometimes not intentional, it's often unconscious, but kind of animosity about it. Oh, buck up, or, we're not going to talk about feelings all the time, or you're not, like there's this belief that what we feel like we need to do to keep them safe is to keep them from being their genuine selves, teach them another way, which is what we learned. I'm a Gen Xer, I'm 53 years old. So a lot of the mentality, a lot of the culture that I learned, coming up, my father was very much like, you can do anything you want, right? I don't think now he's since passed, but I don't think he really believed that. I think he was just kind of like, go do it, and I learned to wear power suits to work, and I learned to cut my hair shorter, and I learned to speak in a certain way. I adapted to the culture in this way, right?
So real quick, I just want to interrupt. One of the things that is foundational in discussions of this book and where we're headed in the state of society is, yes, but what about the boys? Because the boys are dying by suicide faster. The boys are being left behind. And there's data to back this up. Early 1970s, when Title IX was passed, there was 65% of men going to college and 35% of women going to college. Now it has been flip-flopped. There's 65% women going to college and 35% men. Valedictorians, women have passed us by. So with that, and we get this question a lot, or I do.
The both of us do.
And the question is, our boys are in dire straits, the man box and everything else. Shouldn't we be focusing on them instead of our daughters?
You're throwing that as a question to me, I see. So like I said, there's a reason that I enjoy doing presentations with Todd or my friend John Duffy, who writes about rescuing our sons, because it's an important conversation. The data is real. The data is, there has been a shift. The unfortunate part is that it doesn't show up in then their lives, their work world. So women, yes, they're going to college more often, and they are maybe the valedictorians more often, but it doesn't translate into something different when they get into work. And so there's a lot of there's some people in Men Living that Todd, some people on the board that I have arguments with a lot, because they're very focused on, but look at what the boys are doing. And again, it's not about lack of concern. It's about, you're still focused on these data points when really in the world, when the girls get out of college or the experiences they have in college, talking about the experiences with sexual assault in college and the lack of any kind of follow-up on that and the statistics around that and their experiences with professors. There's a whole other story underneath those data points.
Well, and real quick, it is true that men are 3 times more likely to die by suicide than women, but I hear that all the time. I don't know if you guys ever hear that in circles that you are in. But what you don't hear is women actually attempt suicide as often as men. The difference is women usually try to do that with pills, and men do it with lethal means, which is guns or doing something much more drastic. So, but you don't hear that very often. You just hear men are 3 times more likely to die by suicide.
Yeah.
So,
which even this conversation, and I bring it up just because I like to jump on it at the top, is that it's not a worthy conversation to discuss the difference in the genders or where girls and women are exceeding expectations in some way. It's that it's often this red herring where then we start going, well, then maybe we don't need to worry so much about girls, when really not a lot has changed underneath that data. And so when I get asked that question about why are you writing a book about girls, or specifically about talking to them about these things in the culture. And again, I wrote this book a year ago, so you can imagine now I'm even more happy that I have it in my hand and that I can share it, is because there will never be a time that we don't need to talk about girls and women. Never, because there'll always be a push and pull. There'll always be, even when things look good in data points, it's what's the reality of their experiences? What is the reality of the their conversations with people, how they're perceived, the obstacles they have to overcome. And sometimes we don't, just like Todd, we've been married 22 years, took us being married for 10 years to him shift from thinking I was being neurotic to the fact that I had to be more, conscientious and hypervigilant about staying safe, because that's the reality of women. It kind of goes without it. They don't see it because we just do it,
maybe this would be a good time
Sure.
to talk about adaptability and
Sure.
how you, as a woman, and even when you're younger, you had to adapt to our society.
Yeah.
And it's now our turn to do the same thing as men and boys.
Yeah, I think, again, focusing on this gender point, is that the question a lot, because the issue with boys who are in therapy right now, who are struggling with a sense of identity, is a lot of them end up, and this is, generically speaking, end up smoking weed in the basement, playing video games. They don't have this desire to, to finish college, or they don't have this desire to go get a job. And there's a lot of this, like they're feeling overwhelmed and just that they don't feel like there's a place for them. They feel, and my conversation around that, even though me saying this isn't going to necessarily make all the difference, what I want to point out is how much girls and women have had to adapt to a new culture over and over and over again, where when the culture shifts, women have to figure out how to be accommodated in that culture. We have to figure out how to, it's like, okay, it's not just about trends and about appearance, but it's about, okay, this is then what we're going to focus on, or, oh, this is what's needed, then I'm going to show up this way. Like I said, reiterating, like, oh, we need to be taken seriously. We need to wear suits. Okay, I'm going to do that. To be taken seriously, I need to not wear certain things that others perceive as sexy. All the things that happened over the last 10 years about girls shouldn't be wearing yoga pants to school because it distracts people. Who are the people? It distracts people from, educating themselves because they're distracted by women's clothes. So girls are forced to accommodate the culture. And what I often say to this question about boys and men is that there is an accommodation that has to happen now with boys and men too. It's an adaptation of how, instead of let's go back to a time when you understood completely who you needed to be and what a man's role was, or what a boy's role was, or what the expectations were, how do you adapt to this changing culture? How, as a boy or a man, do you figure out what you stand for and who you are and what you can do, rather than waiting for someone to tell you this is who you are and this is how you fit in? Will you explain what the man box is, just so they have an understanding?
Man box is a term that describes that in boy culture, that, and then I want to get to the book.
Oh, I
Because
promise.
we're
I
talking
promise.
about boys, and I know I've led you in this direction. I am only as valuable by how many athletic trophies I have on my bedstand, or how much money I have, or how funny I am. Like the things that,
Or how
boy
much
culture-
sex I have.
how much sex I have, the things that boys elevate. So I am only as good as how strong I am athletically or physically. It's all the lies that we're taught as what it means to be a man. Like strength, vulnerability is a weakness instead of a strength. I happen to think that vulnerability is a strength, but I was raised for the first 35 years of my life thinking vulnerability was a weakness. Now I actually have turned that upside down and think that vulnerability is a strength. So the idea is to create an awareness that there is a man box, because first, in order to shift through it or transform through it, you got to know that it exists. And then once you know it exists, then you could start picking some of that apart a little bit, saying, actually, if I'm on the speech team, is that as good as being on the football team? And boy culture, of course not. Like if you're on the basketball or the football team, it's much more important. So that's a basic understanding of the man box.
And then anything outside of the man box is deemed feminine and deemed weak.
Yeah.
So that's why I like talking about the man box first, is then you understand anything on the outside of that is considered something a boy doesn't want to be. A boy doesn't want to be a girl. A boy doesn't want to be called a girl. A boy doesn't want to be considered a girl in any way, shape, or
You don't want
form.
to throw like a girl.
You don't want to throw like a girl, run
No,
like a girl, whatever. Yes.
So I have an 8-year-old boy and
Yes.
a 7-year-old girl. Do you find that the boys organically, do you find if they have a sister that it organically is a little easier than if you just had like 3 strapping boys, like that they can come to?
Probably.
think
I
that's
have
a great
I have a younger
question.
sister and an older brother, and my sister was a tomboy.
She adapted to.
Yeah, she
Yeah.
jumped on with us
Okay.
instead of. But I think, to your point, I think that is an important. If you can see something else, you got to see it to be it. And if I'm with 3 guys who are 3 brothers who are always trying to be the strongest, baddest of the bunch, then it's hard to relate to the feminine.
But to your point, like that's a big part of this book is the role modeling, right? And not a role modeling like you're acting it out, but a real true like belief system or question asking, or taking certain things, out of secrecy, like in your home, for your daughter, are tampons and pads just out, next to the toilet? Does her brother ever have to go buy them for her? Does her father or any men in her life, like say, I'm going to the grocery store, do you need tampons? Like, is it normalized?
Most dads don't even utter the words tampons or pads, by the way.
Yeah. And that instead of making it a girl thing or something we don't touch or talk about, it's like, oh yeah, that's culture. Like 51% of the population gets their periods, and we buy these things that I don't know what it is in California, but that we're often taxed even higher for buying, even though they're absolutely necessary. And, you know, Viagra and what's the thing for the hair? Rogaine are not, right? So like the
And I
visual
think you need
needs.
insurance or something.
Yeah, for sure. And so, and these are the things that it's not that we have to go out and fight all these battles right this second. I mean, I like that people are, and I like that we are doing it, but this is more about like, you know, let's pay attention to those things. Like, how do we, like, I'm, you know, I've been a social justice person for a long time and kind of doing the macro. And I've realized over the last like 3 or 4 years again that I have to go back to micro, like, you know, families, what's being talked about in the home, how have we normalized, you know, being a girl or what it means, you know, like your son has a front row seat to an experience. And when your daughter is, and again, I'm going to generalize, I don't know this about her daughter, but when she's crying or she is being what we call in our culture dramatic, is it like, oh, girls, you know, all these girls, and they fight and they're mean girls, and then that, and so your son is watching this, like, you know, pushing down of this normalization of having an emotional expression, because your son has just as many emotions as your daughter and feelings, and actually, you may
His are
know,
bigger.
right?
His are way bigger.
Oh, see, I love this.
It's great. You're creating a
He's the deeply
space.
feeling.
You're creating a space in your household where he's encouraged to do that. That's great, but that is not the norm.
So tell me more about that. Is that him as a person?
Uh-huh.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, she's the one that's a little more.
Yeah,
She keeps
masculine.
everything more buttoned up,
Mhm.
and he's just not deeply feeling. Every emotion is the biggest, whether it's excitement, competitiveness, sad, you know, just anxiety, whatever. It's the biggest emotion ever.
Great,
So
because
he's-
most of us just push all that.
Yeah,
down.
no.
How does that translate with his friends and school?
Oh, well, he's like that at school.
Yeah.
Right.
But he's a very boisterous. He's the biggest personality in the room.
Got it.
Most of the time anyway, which can be off-putting to some, hard for teachers, like, you know, that sort of thing. So, you know, but he's very smart, very bright. He's very, you know, but you know, he can be a lot for people.
Yeah. Well, and why I love these kind of conversations is sometimes when you're trying to write about something like an entire gender, you know, people are going to be like, well, of course, that's not, you know, what my kid is like. And which is awesome, because I love when there's the thing that I always ask about then, though, is like how the kids run up against the cultural norms of their gender. Like what do they experience when they are more emotional with their guy friends, or when they're more emotional with a teacher? Is the teacher more concerned about the boy who is emotional versus the girl who is emotional, where they're like, oh, you know, that's just what, you know, there's a lot of it in a lot of this. Even when I talk about it, it sounds like so much of it is unconscious. Like it's not so overt. You know, sometimes the things I see, even people that I work with who are therapists and they, you know, work with kids all day long, and I hear them say certain things where I'm like, whoa, you know, there's like a really unconscious bias around this. And sometimes it's just so they can generalize and, you know, get things done in their work, but and not all of it's like hard hitting misogyny, but a lot of it is stereotypes and, you know, belief systems about certain kids just based on, you know, gender. Okay.
So the book is called Restoring Our Girls. Really what this is about is real conversations.
Yeah.
So the book is framed in 5 chapters. One is why, you know, and I want you to talk about what real conversations are
Mhm.
as you explain it, why our girls, our daughters need it, why we're afraid to have it, a guide for these conversations, kind of like a roadmap on how we go about doing it. And then the 4th is real things that our girls want us to know as
Mhm.
parents. And then the 5th chapter is our 3 daughters each share their story of something specific in their journey through womanhood or girlhood. Or
Yeah.
whatever. So what is a real conversation as best you can describe off the cuff?
Well, I think when I say real conversations, I think people a lot of times assume that I'm talking about sex, or that I'm talking about drugs or weed, or, you know, alcohol, which, yes, that's part of it. It's not that those conversations are obviously high priority, and they're, you know, very important. And I want to help parents have those conversations. I've been teaching sex ed in the parochial schools around Chicago for a long time, because the parochial schools do not have sex ed. So they will call me in for 1 hour and say, go do it. go tell our kids. And before I meet with the kids or the girls, because I'm just with the girls, the parents come in and I tell them what I'm going to talk to them about. And you can imagine the questions, and they're terrified. And, a lot of like, well, what are you going to say to them? And a lot of it is based in religion. So there's a lot of those kind of, things that I have to discuss with them. But there's also when I tell them, I'm going to tell your girls to head home and ask you some questions about these things. And they're like, the belief that I'm going to get through everything in an hour with their kids around sex. It's obviously never one conversation. It's an ongoing conversation that starts when they're really young about their bodies. It's an open discussion for whenever they have something they want to ask. And that's true around sex, and that's also true around school, and that's also true around grades, and that's also true around friendships and feelings and mental health. Like that, the whole idea of having a real conversation is having things be not things we're trying to avoid in the house. Not like, oh, we're not going to talk about that now, or save that for another time, or you're not old enough. If a kid is asking us a question, and again, this book is more about 12 to 25, but I'll just say overall, if a kid is asking a question, it's a question that needs to be answered. And I don't mean answered with a perfect answer. I don't believe in perfect answers, because even if you're like, I don't know, I have no idea how to answer that, I'm going to think about that and I'm going to come back to you, because that's exactly what we're there for as parents. Like we kind of get stuck in the mindset of that we're driving them everywhere, or getting them places, or trying to help them with grades. And we're kind of this person guiding their life. But really what they need is discussion and camaraderie and openness, and in their home, like a sense of comfort. Yes.
So I've read the book, and I think I need to go through that third part again.
Yes.
I have a just turned 13-year-old.
Yes.
This particular year has been quite challenging.
Mm-hmm.
I think as soon as they get their period
Yep.
and all of that, the door starts to shut and they become a different person.
Yeah.
We've always, my husband and I have been very open about everything. Like she's can talk to us about anything. We talk to her about anything. And it's just this year has changed. So I guess the question or advice is like, for somebody who she feels like so much anxiety, I think from just everything in the world, everything they talk about school, everything about friends. And I'm not on social media, and she's not really on social media. She's part of text chains and things, but she does like to be on the internet to watch clips.
Yeah.
But they're all got so much going on in their heads and so many struggles inside.
Yeah.
So how do you talk to somebody who doesn't want to talk?
Right. Right.
And it's just so hard as a parent to to sit there and want to help so much. And I know she takes things in and listens, whether we've talked about makeup or talked about the different things. I know she takes it in, but it's just how do you talk to her now?
Yeah. So I feel and it's always a different age, 13 is where you're talking about, it can start earlier, can start later, but it's the new stage that you have reached as a parent is you are now in the relate, curiosity, and join her. It's very different. So instead of I'm going to talk to you about these things and I'm the mom and I'm going to teach you, now you're in, tell me about, what you're looking at. What music are you listening to? And not in I'm hammering you with questions, but I tell my daughters to make me playlists of their music. And I'm like, okay, why this person? Yeah. Why do you like this person? Or, we love to get into conversations. I'm a pop culture person, so that's already very easy for me. I have to sometimes be careful because sometimes I'm like, yeah, just do that. And for a lot of parents, it's well, that's more work. I feel like I have to now go out and figure out who Gracie Abrams is. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So for me, I love that. Yeah. And so it's and asking those questions. And even if it's somebody that they're listening to who you don't really love, or you're oh, I've heard some things, instead of, I can't believe you listened to that, that's junk, that's trash. It's tell me about them. And
we definitely do that.
Awesome.
We're just in that phase of we pretty much don't say anything because she hates us.
Yeah.
So we're just let her come to us and let's give her space that she needs.
Yeah.
And not be naggers. It seems like the more you nag them, the more you ask so how was your day? How was your this?
Right.
This? They are just we've learned that this year.
Yes.
But it's killing us because all we want to do is get in there and help.
Yeah.
With certain things to talk about things. And
Yeah.
it's just this
she's kind of, she's also in the stage, again, it's not always at 13, but that I have to negotiate some things on my own without your help. And I would say that just what you said in that 1 minute, you're already doing a lot by saying, I'm honoring the fact that she wants us to back the hell up a little bit. And she doesn't hate you at all. You know that. And the reason I say that is there's a very normal experience, excuse me, that, child development, that they have to push us, push away from us because they have to do things on their own and make mistakes and have challenges, which is why, when people will be like, well, my kid's in high school and they're really struggling with some things. I'm like, exactly. Like, that's the whole time. It's going to happen in college too. It's going to happen in their 20s. Like, they are pushing and pulling and figuring out their identity. It's not like when they were 7, 8, and 9 and they would skip down the street and they had, didn't have a care in the world. It's like it's so different. And you just being someone who's more, and I'm always really careful when I say this, but more like a friend. And it's not, I want to be best friends with my girl. It's not that crap. It's things like when she comes home and maybe doesn't talk and she's like, I just want to go read. Say, oh, yeah, okay, I totally get that. And then when she comes down, say, how's the book? Instead of, you're going to go read again? You're not going to sit with us? There's a neediness that parents tend to have at this stage that girls, I mean, boys too, but I'll just speak to what the girls tell me all the time, is exhausting to them. They're like, when you get to the back of the book about, real things girls want you to know, it's not I hate you, leave me alone. It's like, I feel your neediness. I feel that you want it to be the way it was. I feel that you're worried about me, and your worry about me makes me worry about me. Because if you're like, oh, you got this, and saying you got this doesn't mean they're not going to make mistakes. It means I trust who you are, and you're going to go through some shit, but I still trust who you are, and that that when you're going through it, you'll come to me to help you pull out of it, even if it's just incrementally. And so what I will say to you, though, is mom to mom, it sucks because we have to adapt to that. And we have to be, have you guys seen that Tina Fey thing on Jimmy Fallon where she's like, having a teenage daughter is like, having a crush in the office place, where you're kind of like, oh, do you want to come down and have dinner with us? Maybe not, maybe you do. But there's a little like you have to be different with them. The relationship is shifting. What I will tell you, though, is that it's shifting and adapting, and we can do that. And they will come back and be friendly with us, not when they're 25, but like in a year or two. If we can adapt to this new thing, and they don't feel the neediness or my mom's disappointed in me or my mom and dad are judging me because I'm changing or they don't trust me. If we're like alongside them rather than pulling them or pushing them, they settle in to a new reality, but it'll never be like it was when they were 10. I know. That's what I'm saying, mom to mom. That's the hard part.
Question, and then I'm going to.
Yeah.
It sounds like a question of reassurance, mom to mom here. I have a 15-year-old, so I hear you completely. And I would just say that some of it is being present without being pushy. So car rides, being in the kitchen, or wherever they're doing their homework, providing snacks, or like folding laundry near them. It's like being there without like looking them in the eye, like, how was your day? What did you do? What did you learn? Which you will get fine, nothing, go away. So it's that being present.
Exactly. And the reason that they're like, fine, go away, is all of those things like, how was the test? How's the class? What do you need to do? To them just reads as, you don't think I can do this. You're more worried about my grades than me. Like, there's a statistic that I put in the book about and I can't remember the exact statistic, but that the majority of teenage girls believe that their parents would rather them, get A's in school than be a kind person. Like, because, and it's like, how could they think that? I just want them to be a kind person. It's because we ask them about grades in school constantly. So obviously a girl is going to read that very literally, like, they want me to be a certain way. Why aren't you trying out for the play? Why aren't you trying out for varsity? Why aren't you doing these things? These are our desires. And we'll say, but I just want them to be their best selves. That's not really what we want. We want to be comfortable in who our kid is becoming in the way that we think that they will be successful, rather than allowing them to figure out how to be successful in their own way. And it may not be in the way, it may not be in the way that is textbook or in the movies. You know what I mean? Our kids all have like a different path. And she right now is like, I'm going to do this on my own, but she's not on her own. You're there, and you're just saying. And one more thing I want to say, I have a whole section about when my girls went through these phases, because they kind of come and go, depending on where they are. I put a lot of Post-it notes on their door, not things like come talk to me, but things like, I missed you this morning thinking about you. This new movie's coming out in 2 weeks. Did you know that? Nothing. I'm not saying go with me. I'm just like sharing, right? Things like I'm texting them during the day and saying, here's an article I thought you would enjoy because it's about someone they love. I don't need anything back. These are kind of the ways I'm showing up in new ways. Okay.
Okay. So we're basically through the intro in chapter 1.
I know. This is how book talks go.
Before the one thing I want to say is about being present. The way I interpret, I 100% agree with you. The minute that I need something from my kid, that she knows it and pulls away. So it's hard to, because I want to connect. So she knows I need connection, which is really unattractive. And instead just try to be there with her, not needing anything, which is impossible because I need connection.
Well, and did you hear what she said about how just be around folding laundry? Yeah. So that's
not needing something.
And that's my thing, is sometimes my day when I explain to Todd what I've done, it not like, here's all the things I've done, but like, I'll be like, well, I just went and sat in the chair while they were in the kitchen. I just went and folded clothes downstairs, or I was kind of reading a book. And he doesn't, and again, not throwing you under the bus, but he doesn't do that. No, he goes to the office, goes to work. He's not thinking about how do I be present.
Or I am asking her direct questions that she doesn't want to answer because
right.
She's exhausted because she's been in school all day. Okay. In one out breath or sentence, because I want to skip over chapter 2 so we get to the better stuff.
Okay.
Why are we afraid of real conversations?
Because then we have to look at ourselves, and we have to look at what we really need, and we have to look at what's really bothering us or what really scares us. And all those things are very human. I have no judgment of that. I've had to do it. I've had so much of my own therapy. I've done, I meditate, I'm doing all the things I need, journaling, to like deal with my own crap, because a lot of things that I'm expecting my girls to do comes from either what I did, what I didn't do, what I'm worried about, what might happen. Like, the best story for us is all 3 of our girls, when they were young, had a lot of social anxiety, like being away from us. It was interesting. There was like all 3, and they had this like certain period of time. And, there was a lot of parents who were like, you have shy kids. They're shy. And there's a lot of fear around like, well, I need to push my kid then, so they're not shy. I need to do something so they're not like this. And we really had to work hard to be like, we're not going to do anything about this. This is, if they need us right now, they're 5 years old. I mean, come on, and that gradually works its way through, just like things work their way through at 13 or 14 or 15. It's more about I'm trusting your process rather than I'm going to make you do something so you don't end up either like me or that you do better than me. It depends on who we are.
We had a kid who did not talk to their teacher the entire school year in preschool as a 4-year-old. And the teachers are like, this is a problem because your kid will not say a word to us. And Cathy and I are like,
she talks a lot at home.
Who cares?
Yeah.
Like, it's okay. And she came around, but she came around on her schedule. Okay. So
well, actually, there's because her preschool teacher just texted us because this daughter that didn't talk for the whole year is now in speech and got 2nd in state last weekend. Yeah. And her preschool teacher texted us and said, like she actually talks, and she was, trying to be, comment to us, but it was in a weird way, kind of an apology. Like, I really was pushing you on what your child needs to do. And it's not like we had a grand plan. It's not like we were like, go do speech. It was just, it's interesting.
This was a girl who was paralyzed with an eating disorder.
Right.
She was in 7th grade.
Yep.
And she couldn't do anything.
Yeah, her story's in the book, and my 3rd daughter, and what she went through and experienced, and what our whole family went through, because it's never about the kid, right? It's about the whole family. Like, how are we all, part of this situation? And, it's just interesting. Her story's great.
Chapter 3, a guide for real conversations. There's a bunch of stuff in here. Widen your perspective, see their viewpoint. I want to focus on encouraging critical thinking. Why did you think it was important to bring that into the...
Critical thinking is probably my most favorite thing to talk about with all kids, but especially with girls. I came from a place, before I wrote this book, I wrote a book proposal all about high control groups, cults, and abusive relationships, because I've had experience with all of them. Nothing serious culty, but cultiness, like where I was in a lot of communities, caregiving, holistic yoga, things that I was starting to feel really special more special than other people, where it gets really high control. And thank goodness worked my way through those things. But I was also in an emotionally abusive relationship before I met Todd. So, and I also came from a very good family that was lovely. A dad who was supportive, a mom who was home. Like, it's not a story of, well, she just didn't, have what she needed. It's a story of, this is a big part of the, girls in the culture of belief system that around belonging and around thinking and about your own intuitive knowledge and being told what to think, often being told what to think because you want to belong. You accommodate what other people are saying about you. You get more from external praise than from understanding what you need. It's typically more female. Anyone can join a cult or be in a high control group, but it's typically more female. I am a professor at Dominican University, and it's primarily girls because it's social work. I do have some boys, but it's like 98% girls that are in my classroom. And I will tell you that at least 75%, if not more, have been in an emotionally abusive relationship or physically abusive relationship, which is kind of like a cult of one, right? Because it's basically somebody telling you what to think or what not to think or how to dress or how to be. Or once they, there's all these red flags for, like gaslighting and grooming is like the big, and I don't like using that word anymore because it's being weaponized against people, but it's like there is this love bombing, where people come on really strong and start to tell you why you're so amazing, and they fall in love with you in a week, and you're like, I'm totally in. And then once they know you're in, there starts to be this subtle manipulation of, like, well, now you've really upset me. And you're like, well, you loved me so much 2 weeks ago and I was amazing, so this must be me. I must be the problem. And these are tactics. It's, I've always said it's like you think that all like abusive people and cult leaders go to the same school because they all do the exact same thing. It's like textbook, there's like this way to manipulate. So the reason why I talk about critical thinking is I know that I can't, save everybody from having that experience. And sometimes those experiences tend to be, that's what, pushes us forward and helps us have a more understanding of ourselves. But I do believe that talking in the home about trusting our own sense of something and talking about different sides of a story, because what is critical thinking? Let's tear an issue apart. Instead of this is who we are, this is how I feel, this is what's right or wrong, let's talk about the nuance of this situation. Why would someone say this? Why does someone believe this? Let's think about their background or where they live or what's going on. And with my girls, the conversations I had with them were rarely about like, let's have an argument, I'm right, you're wrong, and more about when they would say something really absolute, I'd say, well, that's interesting. And I understand why you say that, but what do you think about blah, 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 blah. So it wasn't me judging what they were saying. It was me trying to expand what they were thinking. There's a lot of billboards when I live in Illinois. So when you're going from Indiana to Michigan, there's all these billboards about Jesus and you're going to hell and a lot of like scare tactics. And so we've had plenty of times being on these roads where my girls have been like, man, religion must suck if this is what, and it's like, well, wait a second. Who's putting these up here? Why? What does that mean? Does that really mean that's what Jesus said? Let's like pull these conversations apart rather than giving a final answer. That's what critical thinking is. That's what you hope they're getting in school, which hopefully they are. Hopefully you're just adding to this. But if you're doing that in the home, they're going to be less likely to get into a situation where someone's like, in 2 days, I love you. And they'd be like, what's going on here? There's no way do you know what I mean? They're going to question something. Or somebody who's like, you need to think like we do if you want to belong. They're going to be like, red flag, because that isn't what's normal in their own lives. Do you see what I mean? Okay.
So first of all, time check. It's 10 a.m. Cathy and I have nowhere to be, but I just want to be respectful, and we're going to keep going until somebody tells me. Okay. And if somebody's got to bail because they got to do something, go bail. But we're going to keep going. I just need 1 or 2 sentences from what I love when somebody tells me what to do and how to do it instead of having to think. And Cathy has a section in here called "Eliminate These Phrases." Like that's what I can get on board with. Like, okay, if I'm saying this, stop saying it. So I'm going to say the phrases, and you just give me a sentence.
Okay, I'll be quick with this.
You're too sensitive.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, how many of you heard that growing up too? Yeah, of course. And so, and I did, and I am very, very, when I say very, very sensitive, it's not, but it's like when I was growing up, I feel like things affected me a lot, other people's moods, dogs on the street, everything kind of like, I'm still like that. But you're too sensitive is, again, kind of pushing against that man box where you're basically saying, if you're having sensitivity, there's something wrong with you. If you are having an emotional experience, you need to rein it in. If you are feeling this way, then you don't have your shit together. Like, let's just be real. And so, the reality obviously is that it's one of the best things that our kids can be. I mean, if we had more sensitivity, if we can, and again, it's one of those words that it gets hijacked where people make it a negative thing. But if we understood, if we had more sensitivity, we'd be in a different place with a lot of things. Let's just say that. There would be more compassion. There would be more connecting to others. There'd be more concern. There would be more, how is the whole doing instead of how am I doing? That's what we're aiming for.
Number 2, you're being dramatic.
Same thing, dramatic and sensitivity, and you're being too emotional. They're all in the same world. Oftentimes when, you're raising children and you have different gender children, there's a lot of like, my girls are dramatic and oversensitive. My boys, they don't have that problem, when, as we already discussed, that's not the case.
Number 3, I told you so.
Yeah. So this obviously comes straight from the girls that I work with. It's the thing they're trying to avoid the most from you. So if we can just remove that completely, because the truth is, of course you knew to not do something because you've already gone through it. When we look at them, I always talk about put on your kid glasses instead of your adult glasses. Because when you look at your girls' lives through your adult glasses, you're like, what are you doing? Why would you say that? Why would you text that? You wouldn't, because you're a grown woman. They are going through the experience right now. And when you're like, well, I told you not to do that. I told you this would happen. Instead, it's just an opportunity to say, that sucks. I'm sorry that happened. Oh, it sucks. They may then, this is what they always say too, they may then say, well, you told me not to, and I still didn't. That's okay. That's okay. Sometimes we have to learn through our own. My mom would always say to me, sometimes you just need to learn through, tactile. She's like, you just need to do it. She goes, I can tell you a lot of things, but you seem to need to do it. So.
I'm just going to fly through these last 3.
Okay.
What's wrong with you?
Oh.
Always and never. And I don't believe you.
I don't believe you is the one I wrote about the most. And, with the book, you guys can look at that as far as that one, what that holds in our culture. It's bigger than just our homes. There's a kind of an overreaching societal implication that women shouldn't be believed, that they're untrustworthy, that they're trying to manipulate. And again, I get this great, again, most of the men that Todd works with in his men's organization are lovely human beings. But I still, when I'm working with them or doing a class, you get that kind of underlying feedback from them that there's like, well, women, and women say these things and women do these things. There's this, again, it's an internalized misogyny around that we're not to be trusted. So we have to have those conversations with our girls around, this is a cultural, we have to be thoughtful about not. It again goes back to your question about telling them to be genuine, and really sometimes they get pushback. And then the one before, always never, we kind of got that. And then there was one more. Okay. What's wrong with you? So your girls already believe that something is wrong with them. Okay. They already believe that one of my favorite things to do is like I said, when I teach sex ed, I teach it to 5th and 8th grade girls. And the 5th grade girls, the first thing I start with is, do you know everybody has a voice in their head that tells them they're bad and wrong? And they're like, really? Because it's the first time, because they think that's just them. They think everybody is fine, and that the thoughts that they have in their head that stress them out are just them. And so opening that conversation about, everybody has a negative self-talk. Everyone has a negative voice, and we got to know it. We got to recognize it, give it a name if you want to, and let's normalize this. And they absolutely love that. So if you are someone who, again, if you're in a conversation with your girls and you feel like you need to win, like the I told you so thing, and you say, what's wrong with you? You're solidifying something for them, which is that they already think something's wrong with them. So you're and then they're going to push back even more.
So the 4th, go ahead.
Sorry.
That's all right.
Sure.
No,
yeah, absolutely.
It's related. So I have 3 daughters and a husband who's very close and very involved with the daughter. So I'm sure, your name's Todd, right?
Yeah.
You can relate to. So we are all so highly emotional
that
it's even for me, I'm just this is crazy. This is so much right now.
Yeah.
And there are times I really do feel for my husband, because he's so involved and he's close with everybody, where he'll also be like everybody stop. It's too much. Everybody just needs to literally stop yelling. I'm taking it personally. So I'm just wondering, I don't know, if you can because then he'll feel bad if I go back and tell him some of these things. He's like, oh shit, here I go again.
Right.
All this stuff I did wrong. I told them to stop. I didn't. But like, I do understand feeling like there's just too much
Mhm.
sometimes, and we need to like rein it in.
So interesting.
Yeah.
I feel like we have to be discerning about, because when I think of femininity, I think of emotional expression and all that. When I think of masculine energy, I think of stoicism and shutting emotions down.
Right.
There are times when shutting an emotion down is a healthy thing to do at a specific moment.
Right.
The problem is we grew up in a society where I was taught to push all of it down. So there's a time when like, okay, enough's enough. A boundary's been crossed. Can we just? One thing I would say to your husband is before you tell anybody else to stop yelling, and before you tell somebody, like a lot of times I'm like, okay, take a breath. You're a little erratic. That's always an indication for me to take a breath first. So I try not to ever tell anybody else to take a breath before I'm doing it myself. So just model to your husband. I would invite your husband to model what it is that he wants to see in them. And maybe he's sick of modeling it. He's like, enough is enough.
And we can use humor too.
Right.
Because the thing is like in your example, I know exactly what you mean because I have the exact same household. So I'm not even picking that apart. But, are we too much? Or is that the reality? Right?
No, it's a really good question.
Exactly. And so even in that question, which I ask sometimes too, is it's like, have we learned we're too much? Have we been told we're too much? And then we watch dad have an experience where dad is the representation of culture, of like, oh, we need to get it together, where maybe we're having a good discussion that's like, high intensity and like critical thinking and you were wrong, and it's not always, once we start to treat each other poorly or dehumanize each other or push back, obviously there is a time we need to rein it in. But I think that sometimes his ability to tolerate it is very different than mine.
Right.
Well, and I sometimes just remove myself from a conscious place, and sometimes I remove myself as an escape from an unconscious place. So everything that happens as we get challenged by being in relationships with other human beings, all of it is an opportunity for me to look in the mirror. Because there's times when like I can handle this differently. Because if your husband has a pattern of doing that,
By the way, I'm the one who thinks it's all too much.
Okay.
Yeah. You're like, how do we? Yeah.
Right.
Before you move on to the next thing, because we're over time, we're just kind of here. Do you guys have any questions? Like, instead of us just filtering through the book more, is there something you want to ask to make sure that I get to it? Yes.
I have two daughters.
Yes.
And I had a question about my almost 17-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
She was diagnosed with ADHD
Mm-hmm.
and has issues with executive functioning.
Yes.
And so I feel that I have to be often like really involved in like making sure she's doing what she's supposed to be doing.
Right.
And of course it like drives her crazy.
Sure.
And then this last year it's been better because now we have somebody else that's doing more of that, and so that I've been able to step back a little bit.
Yes.
And it works better. But I still, especially lately, I've been feeling that I have to again sort of be more on top of it because she's an 11th grader. And
Yes.
she needs to like get her GPA up for applying to college and like all that stuff. So I'm like, I guess I'm getting like worried.
Yes.
And I hear her say a lot that, like she says, I don't trust her.
Right.
And it's like, Mom, I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. You don't need to be checking on Schoology, and I'm 11, I'm almost 17. And and it's like, of course, it's like, and I tell her, I'm like, I don't want to be doing this.
Right.
But when I don't like pay attention, then you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing.
Right.
So, and it's like, I want her to, from, what you're talking about, having them trust themselves. It's like, how do I find that, balance where it's like, I want her to know that I do trust her, but in a way I don't trust her to do what she's supposed to be doing. So it's like, how do I...
You trust her as a person, but the norms that are necessary in school, you're like, these are some of the things that are challenging to you based on your diagnosis. Like you said, her executive functioning, her ability to organize and remember to do something. Mm-hmm. And so it's going to be a negotiation that you guys are going to have the next 2 years. And when I say negotiation, I don't mean an argument necessarily, but having like a really open conversation about, I do trust you. I know as a human being, you're an amazing person. I know that my concerns are, I'm worried about the expectations of school. I'm worried about, and seeing what she thinks about that. Like, instead of, I need to do this, you don't understand, I'm helping you, which is one of the things in my book I talk about is, one of the things that girls say that they want you to know is, let me tell you about me instead of you telling me about me. That's like my favorite ones, why I put it first, because they're like, you keep telling me about who I am. And so it's like asking her, what are the ways I can support you that aren't annoying? And then if you're, and again, there will be things that slip through the cracks, regardless of ADHD. All of our kids have things where they're like, they don't turn something in. And the reason that happens is so they realize what the consequence of that is. It's not setting them up to fail. It's not making them fail. It's realizing that it's not all on you. Like one thing that in our generation, ADHD for women was not diagnosed. I should say, for girls who are anywhere between like 40 and 60, boys were diagnosed, men were diagnosed, girls were not diagnosed, and women, because it looks different in us. So that means we have a whole generation of women who had ADHD in school, and they had to find coping tools. They had to figure out, like my best friend is very ADHD, and in high school, she was like, she would, make all these lists and had all these things that she did to kind of like manage it. And the reason that she learned to do that is because she realized she had to. And so some of the things your daughter doesn't need to have the experience of being alone. She has the diagnosis, her teacher knows, so you can support her, but you're going to have to allow her to negotiate that a little bit instead of saying you need to do everything the way other kids are doing it. There's going to be, and why I say it's going to be a negotiation is I know that's not going to be comfortable for you. And you're going to be like, but I could do this for her and then it would get done. Or if I just say something, but what's more important in this situation is your relationship with her. That's really what's at the core of this. Is I hear what you're saying about the colleges and she needs to apply, and that is a big deal. But in the big picture of life, I want her to feel like my mom had my back, but she also didn't push me all the time. You know what I mean? She had my back. And when I made a mistake, she was like, okay, you're going to have to deal with this consequence. And then she'd help me get back up. We kind of have to renegotiate our path. And I believe in like going right to the core. You don't have to beat around the bush in this. Say, I know I'm bugging the hell out of you. So how can I support you? And then she may say something one day and 2 days later, she says something different, and that's okay. Instead of, well, you told me to do this. She may say, now I'm done with you doing that. Now, so it's like conversation. I mean, that's what this whole thing is like, knowing that you're not doing it wrong and there isn't one right way.
So you're telling me to like sort of back off a little bit,
And
let her.
Yeah. And
people have told me before, like, just let her.
Yeah.
If she's going to fail. And like, to me, I'm just like, oh my God.
She won't fail. Yeah. And I don't know your kid. I'm saying she won't fail, and I don't have, but what I mean is you're there. So what you're going to say to her is you're backing off, but not quietly. You're backing off in conversation. Like you're going to her and saying, I know I'm driving you crazy. Like go to the core of it. Like we do these things like, well, I'm just going to back off and see if they notice, or I'm going to back off and then maybe we'll have it. It's like, just talk to her about it straight up. How can I help you? Mom, you're driving me crazy because you're talking to me about it all the time. Okay, let's take 2 days off of this conversation. You know what I mean? Like this is where I mean the friend thing, where you're coming at her not as I'm your parent, I'm telling you what to do, but meet her here because she is in 11th grade. She's,
And then I know you have a question, but just stay on their team. They have enough people that
are telling them what to do,
and how to do it. And some of us parents just feel like, well, I got to keep disciplining and guiding and teaching. They're getting that from everywhere, from high school, from peers, from high school counselors. If your daughter thinks that you're on her team and you have her back, that's for me, that's the key. What was your question?
I'm a pediatrician.
Yes.
More than 40 years. I'm obviously not a young mom anymore. Although I did raise 2 daughters, and I did come from very progressive same-sex school back east.
Yeah.
Which I believe saved my life. But I want to say a couple of things because I have to go work soon.
Yeah.
One thing I say to moms a lot about the issues that this mom here is raising is remember that your kid's leaving home in less than 2 years.
Right.
And what you're doing now, if you're doing a lot of accommodating and a lot of scaffolding for her, you are not getting her ready in the right way because she's going to be 3,000 miles away from you. There are parents who do try to micromanage across the country.
I can verify that. Yes.
They won't be doing that. So I always say it's better to let them fail a little bit when they're going to sleep in their own bed, and you can be there in the morning to pick up the pieces with them. So plus you're out of school. I assume you're one of the Archer moms that.
I'm not though.
Okay. Well, I don't know.
I don't know, they're private school.
Okay,
Yeah.
I was going to say if you're at LASD, don't count on anything, but in my opinion, but that's a different story. I wanted to say something very interesting that I learned recently.
Yes.
My practice, by the way, is full of those kids that you talked about. And
Yeah.
many of the moms in my practice were my kids. I knew them their whole life. So the moms now are coming in.
Yep.
And bringing these kids in who are first part of COVID. And we don't talk enough about how much COVID impacted our
Absolutely.
kids. And our kids here in LA were locked down way more than
Longer.
the country
Mhm.
and have had less social skills because of that time that they spent. And probably more negative feelings towards us because they were locked up at home with us. I heard a talk recently. The talk was supposed to be about contraception in adolescence, and one of the statistics that blew my mind was they said only one out of 3 high school seniors is sexually active, and it really blew my mind because I think even back in the days when we barely had birth control in my generation, we were way more sexually active than these kids. And they say it's because they don't know how to connect.
Yeah.
Because they're on this all day.
We didn't talk about that. Was just where I was leading today, very much about what the impact of that is. But they are desperate to get back that connection, and they don't know how. They really want to be helpful. I see this in my practice that the majority of my seniors, if I had to say what are they majoring in college, they want to be in healthy professions. They want to be psychologists, psychiatrists, doctors, nurses.
Human behavior.
They really want to be helpful, and I really was disappointed here in LA that we didn't use our teenagers more after the fires to help them move on. And to you, I wanted to say there is a certain subset of, sorry, I don't know your names, of teenagers who I see go beyond that what feels like hate and are really mean.
Yeah, and I don't mean hate. I meant mean. Yeah, to us only.
Yeah, exactly. Like I push all the parents out of the room, have this great conversation with the kid about their life plan, and I'm thinking, oh, this is so fun to talk like this, and they seem so great. I'm surprised the mother's having so much trouble, although really not. And the mom comes back in the room, the kid bites her freaking head.
Absolutely.
Right? And sometimes therapy really helps with that. Because I say they think you're a doormat. They think you don't exist. They don't identify you as human. And if you have that kid, get help.
Well,
it's not that anything.
Yeah, ours is not as. I don't want to get into it's way too long of a story. We're not that bad. I say I know it's weird, but my kid is a really good kid, and we did try therapy a couple times. For her, she was very vocal about. No, we do it too. For her, it was that she felt and she was vocalized that she felt broken. But we were sending her somewhere for her to be able to say that. It wasn't time. We were there. She was like.
Oh, for sure. Well, and I want to reiterate something, what you said about, what's happened to our kids post-COVID. And they're just not as relational, because they were so, before phones and everything, they were just so forced to be relational. You have to sit at a lunch table, you have to talk to each other, you have to ask people for directions, all those kind of things. And that's kind of a piece of the grassroots of this book is, are we having these conversations at home, not about serious topics all the time, but about music, about movies, about things we like, about our style, their style, in a non-judgmental, relational way. So that's the norm. It's not all on us, but if we're doing that at home, it's easier for them to do it in the real world. So hello. Yes.
Please come on in.
So anyway, you wanted to end, Todd?
Yeah, so I think we're probably over our time.
Yes.
I just want to show the chapter we never got to are real things that girls want you to know, and it has different sections and things that girls have said to you and say, tell my parents this.
Yeah.
Because
the first chapter is called "Can You Tell My Parents This?"
So with that, I just want to say thank you to my
Thank you. Thanks for staying late.
to everybody. And
thanks for being here.
If anybody wants a book signed, you got a pen? I don't know if you got a pen.
Absolutely. Just came out on Audible like 2 weeks ago.
I'm on your podcast.
You are?
I found out about you being here because I listened to your podcast last night.
Oh, great.